Hi, I'm Ted Wolf, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy, but implementation is difficult. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Kevin Eikenberry to the show. Kevin is a world-renowned leadership expert, best-selling author, and founder of the Kevin Eikenberry Group. He's the author of influential books like The Long Distance Leader and Remarkable Leadership, and his insights have shaped how organizations navigate challenges. He has an upcoming book called Flexible Leadership that will be released on March 25th. Kevin, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you here.
Ted, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Kevin, you have an awful lot of history in business and leadership. Tell us a little bit about the journey of what got you to focus on leadership and how you found yourself owning your own business.
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in Michigan, and so people who don't have that experience might not really know what that means, or it might mean different things in their head. What it means for me is that I was involved in a family business from as long as I can remember, and we had a related agricultural business. And so, Ted, I had a tremendous chance growing up to learn a lot about how to run a business and be a part of, and actually make a lot of decisions in business. And after college, I was going to start a company. Took a job instead. Worked in a very large Fortune 10 company for about 8 years. And while I was there, with the goal always of being on my own, right, running my own company. And during that time, I figured out that training and development was what I wanted to focus on, and got myself into that kind of world inside of Chevron, and then left and started my company 31 years ago. And soon after that, to answer the second half of the question, soon after that, I figured out that leadership is where I wanted to focus because for two reasons. Number one is it's the highest leverage point. If we're talking about implementation today, right? And for leaders to be successful, they have to not just know what to do, they have to help it make that happen. And if leaders don't do that, we don't implement very well. And so to me, leadership is a highly leveraged opportunity. And the other thing I found about myself, Ted, is that when I was able to talk about and teach and write about things that helped us both personally and professionally, and in fact, those two things are sort of connected really closely, is when I felt like at my best. And so I often say, in fact, I wrote in Remarkable Leadership that as we become a better leader, we become a better human, and vice versa. So there's a long answer to your short question.
No problem. I have a lot of information to dig into there. So like you, I wanted to have my own business. What was it that drove you? What was your passion that said, I really want to have my own business versus a career in Chevron or et cetera?
Well, a lot of people think about that. Like, I want to be my own boss or whatever. And I don't know that I ever really thought about it that way. It's just that because I grew up in a family-owned business, that's just what I saw as being my path. I don't know that I had some sort of driving piece that sometimes I've talked to lots of people that have that. I wanted to be my own boss kind of thing. To me, it was more about being able to chart a course and ultimately, although it wasn't where I was at the start, but Ted, at this point, I believe I'm doing what I was put on the planet to do. And while that probably could have happened inside of an organization, this is just sort of the path that's laid out for me.
So in leadership, I might say that maybe you followed the family tradition and got into your own business. So let's just say a leader's in a business and there's tradition there and how you lead, what you do. Here's what the processes are. How do you work with them to look beyond what the normal process is and be, if I can use the word flexible, be a flexible leader and actually create some new innovative ways of interacting and leading other people, including themselves?
Well, I think that's critical, and you mentioned that, and you haven't even read the book, but that certainly is a component of the idea inside of flexible leadership. Is the point that what, as my friend Marshall Goldsmith would say in his book, what got us here won't get us where we want to go next. And I think we have to recognize that. And I love the fact, and I know that, for us to be highly effective at implementing, we have to have processes. And I think oftentimes people think of a process as something that's limiting. And I think of it quite differently than that, is it becomes a jumping off point to move from it. So rather than thinking of a process as being, here's what we have to do, it allows us to say, when we can sort of move into routine through the process, then that allows us to open up our brain to spend some time, create new perspective, think differently about where we need to go next. And so to me, process is enablement more than it is confinement, as some people sometimes like to think about it.
And what's the biggest challenge you have when you walk into an organization and you're working with a leader? And let's face it, leaders are kind of type A personalities, and sometimes they have big egos and they think they're right in an awful lot of things, and you hit them with a new concept and, well, it doesn't apply here. How do you manage them through that?
Well, I think the first thing is that we typically work with folks who have enough self-awareness to know that there's a reason that I'm there, or that we're there as an organization. And so, I'm really not all that interested in working with someone who doesn't have a felt need to change, because it's not going to go very well for any of us. So there's really not a lot of point there, right? Now, certainly, I think I've been in situations where I've been able to ask people questions and help them self-reflect to the point to say, well, maybe I need to think about this a little differently. But in short, all of us have ego, and we have to understand that for ourselves. And in fact, as you frame that question, Ted, I have to come into any of those situations recognizing where my ego is as well. But you highlight a really important point that we talk about with organizations all the time that are looking at leadership development across the organization, not just like coaching a leader, right? And that is that what's often forgotten is that, I'll put it this way, that organizations are really good at giving people new skills. But we believe that the process isn't just skill set, it's mindset, skill set, habit set. And that if we don't have the mindset right, it doesn't matter what the skills are. You have super smart people, they can learn what the skills are, never going to take them out of the toolkit, right? Or don't see that those add value. So to your earlier point, if a leader doesn't have a felt need to change, there's really not much point, right? So our focus is to help people come to that discovery moment that says, hey, there's something that I'm doing. Doesn't mean that it's bad, but it's not as effective as it could be. And so once people have that discovery moment that says there's something there that I could do to get better, that's when we can potentially be helpful.
So the secret might be helping them get to that growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, if I can use that term.
100%. Yep.
Okay. What do you find the biggest, I'm going to say, challenge or obstacle personally that a leader today you find needs to work to get through? What's the biggest stumbling block?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to all recognize as leaders, Ted, that doing the work of leading is complex. And so anytime we really truly realize that, we won't have a problem being in the growth mindset. We will be like, we're going to say like, okay, there's always room to get better at this because it's really, really complex. But I think the thing that's more important now than ever is that the world is more complex and the world is more uncertain. And so we as leaders have to get far better at, I think, two things. Number one, we have to get better at dealing with, recognizing, finding some level of comfort in that complexity and uncertainty, number one. And number two, because of that, we're not going to necessarily find the single right answer. I grew up in Chevron and early in my career where everyone was looking, well, what's the best practice? Well, if the context is pretty simple, a best practice is a really good strategy. But in a world that's complex and complicated, we should be trying to find practices, not like identify a single best one, right? And so we have to get better at understanding and being comfortable with uncertainty and complexity. And then secondly, we have to get better at managing tension, the tension between two ideas where the right answer is not one or the other, but finding the right place along that continuum.
Okay. And when you look at an issue like remote work right now, hybrid work, it's all over the board. I know businesses say we want people back, but employees are pretty creative sometimes and they don't want to go back. And how are you helping people work through that dilemma in the business world?
That to me is one of those, we call them flexors in flexible leadership, is that so to me, leadership, let me back up just for a second. Leadership's about reaching valuable outcomes with and through others. And those two things, outcomes and others, are the source of the tension, or part of the source of the tension between outcomes. Say, we need everybody in the office to get things done because that's the way we always got things done. And the others are saying, well, I don't see why we can't get it done, and I don't have to get in my car or get on the train every day, right? And so the tension, one way to frame the tension that you're talking about is to frame it between outcomes and others. But rather than saying one has to win, we have to find what's going to work best to do for both, right? To serve both. And so the way that we have helped organizations attack that, Ted, back from the end of the lockdowns and beyond, is rather than saying what's our approach, what does the work tell us? Right? And rather than creating policy, let's pilot stuff and let's try stuff and find what the work requires. There's some things it's obvious that if we work in a warehouse or work in a factory, the work requires that we must physically be there. But for many kinds of work, that isn't required, right? And so then, since work is more than just the work itself, but it is the social construct around it and the relationships and the collaboration and all of their stuff, then we can start to say, how do we hook those two things together a little differently?
In many respects, do you think it's an issue of trust?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. I think, however, I mean, I definitely think that there are senior leaders or leaders in organizations are saying, I need to bring people back. And what's underneath it is, I'm not sure I trust them. I don't think there's any question about that. However, I think that folks on the employee side are often assuming that to be the reason when it isn't always the reason. So let's just take someone, Ted, that's like you or I's age, right? And if someone's listening to this, they may not know how old you are, but like we're older than the average bear. And so at least I am. And so if I'm a senior executive in an organization and I've moved up through organizations or an organization in a world where everyone worked together, and I know how to navigate that, and I know how to help other people grow in that environment, it's natural that I would want to get back to what I know from my experience works. There's not necessarily any ill intention or negative intention related to saying, I want people to come back together because I know we can work well in that way. Where the person on the other side says, I feel like it can work the other way by not coming in or not coming in very often. And so I just think you don't trust me, or I just think you want to fill the office back up. And so if we want to deal with, because we're paying a rent, right? So if we want to deal with this tension between outcomes and others, the way we deal with it is to have real conversations about that and find out what are the assumptions underneath and what are the real needs and what are the supposed needs, right? And both sides, if I don't really like to think about it as sides, but unfortunately that's how it's ended up in some cases, but really we all need together look at the needs of the outcomes and the needs of the others, and how do we hook those together in ways that work and get us great success. So here's the thing about a hybrid. The way what we've turned hybrid into, Ted, is lowest common denominator.
And what do you mean by lowest common denominator? But if you look at what a hybrid
is in nature, it's bringing two disparate things together and creating something that's new and different and perhaps in some ways better, whether that's a hybrid of two two things to make a new plant, whatever that is, right? And so we have many people, not all, have shortchanged the idea of hybrid by turning it into some sort of ill-fated compromise, rather than how can we create something new that's perhaps better all the way around than either of what we had before.
Mm-hmm. Where do you find in the whole hybrid issue, and it's a complex issue, is it a place to say that we've got 4 or 5 generations working in the same business who want to use technology differently, interact differently, different priorities, different thoughts on control? We all know control is a big issue. You're not going to control me. How do you manage through that with so many different hardcore preferences within generational difference in a company?
I think you hit on a really important point. We are living at a time that we've never had, ever. Industrial revolution, information revolution, all those things. We've never had 4 or 5 generations in the workplace at the same time. And we have that now for a number of reasons. One is we're living longer. Another is, there was a time a few years ago when people's 401ks became 201ks and they decided they were going to work longer. Like there's all sorts of reasons why that's happened, but that is where we are. Now, we're not always going to be there probably, but that's where we are. And I think the first thing is, I love the way you started, because I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that. And then I think that if we can create real dialogue and conversation in our organizations about what are our preferences and what are our needs and what are our experiences, rather than just pitting them or rather than just sort of picking one, right? I think we got a much better, and keep from judging each other about them. I think we got a much better chance of success. Ultimately, we're going to get better results and better implementation, whether we're talking about going hybrid or whether we're talking about finishing this project. If we do a better job of getting everyone's concerns, thoughts, ideas, and perspectives on the table. And that ultimately should be facilitated by the leader, because it probably won't happen automatically.
How do you work through a challenge, multi-generational, hybrid versus not? Can we do it virtually? Can we run the business, have the same accountability? Usually when you get to that issue, very often the human element or the emotional element of an individual comes into play. How do you guide and manage that?
So the first thing I'm going to do is to say, so if that's really where we are, is I'm going to try to get everyone to share how they're feeling about it. Like, we've already got the facts on the table probably. So like, I want people, and I may not use the word feel, I probably will, but I probably won't start there. I'll probably say, I want everyone around the table to share what your perspective is on this situation, where we find ourselves today. It's clear that we don't all see, we got a bunch of smart people in the room, right? And we're not in agreement, at least in part because we don't see it the same way. Tell me how you see this. Tell me how you see this. Tell me how you see this. And if we can get people to do that, and so how does that make you feel? I find that generally speaking, that once people recognize, even if a decision is being made that's not their first preference, if they understand all of the perspectives, we can say like reasonable people can disagree. Right? The reason we get into so much challenge and so much sort of polarity is that we've never had that mutual sharing of what everyone's perspective is first. And if we can start there, and we can start there, we got a much better chance of success.
So a big dilemma that I find in talking to business leaders and being in organizations working with them, in a remote environment, how can you tell when somebody's burned out?
Well, here's the thing. As a leader, so people can be pretty good at hiding that, even if you see them in the office every day. That's the first thing. What I would say is this, is that we as leaders need to be making sure that we are interacting with our team members, not just transacting business. And so in the simplest sort of way, I say that I want to have interactions, not just transactions, which means I'm talking about more than work and weather. Right? I'm talking about something other than the work and the weather. I'm talking about, like, I know that Lisa's son, Austin, is playing in the regionals the state football regionals on Friday night. And so I can have a conversation with her about Austin, and I can get it by having that conversation. Then we can start to understand and see. I can start to see like how's she doing with that, what's going on. He's going to graduate from high school, and so like how's she feeling about all that, and how's the college stuff going. And so by number one, opening that up, she now knows she has another ally. And if it happens to be her boss, that's probably a positive. But just having conversation that goes beyond work and weather gives us a better chance of seeing how people are doing. And I say seeing on purpose, because if we're working remotely, distributed, hybrid, whatever word you want to use here, we should be doing what you and I are doing right now, Ted, and then we've got our cameras on, right? Mm-hmm. Because the richest communication we can have is when we have all of the cues, the verbal, the visual, and the vocal cues. And so we've got a far better chance if we're seeing people on a camera than if we're just reading their messages in Instant Messenger.
What are some of the most effective ways that you've seen that you can keep remote employees engaged and aligned with the organization's goals, but also their core values and beliefs?
Well, I think that starts with being really clear on the front end when people are hired that we have some alignment about that. Like the silly example that I would use is like if I'm a vegetarian, I'm probably never going to get super excited if I'm working at Outback Steakhouse, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious, I suppose, but it makes the point that hopefully we're inviting people to join our team where there's at least some alignment around some of that deeply held value stuff. Then we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep bringing it to the table. When our team meets, we meet in all sorts of ways throughout the month, but once a month we're all together for a meeting, and we open that meeting by looking at mission, vision, values. And I show the same slide and we talk about it. We talk about how it relates to what's going on in the last month. And I'll ask someone to say, like, what's happened in the last month that's connected to those things. So like you have to consciously keep talking about it. Right. And then, of course, if we want, we could do a whole show on how do we get people engaged for sure. But what I would say here about the other word you use, which is accountability, which I sometimes say is the longest 4-letter word in the English language, because we misuse it. Accountability is simply ownership. People want to be accountable, but they can only be accountable when they feel a sense of ownership for things. So we as leaders, if we want our folks to be accountable, it does not matter where they're working. It does not matter whether we see them. It's all about, do they feel like they have a sense of ownership of, and are you granting them ownership of things where they have a level of influence in how things happen? And if we do that, it doesn't matter if they're in the same building or if they're not. I've written 3 books, well, really 4, I guess, counting a second edition of Long Distance Leader with Wayne Termel, and the entire writing process of 4, I guess you could call it 4 books, of us being physically together, we could count in a handful of hours.
So in working with remote teams, do you find you have to have a different set of metrics to evaluate their performance?
I think the first thing, metrics are important, and we want to be able to measure how people are doing, and all of that is wonderful. I think one of the biggest challenges that leaders find in relationship to measuring or monitoring performance of folks who aren't around them physically is to be careful that we're really measuring the right stuff. And measuring the right stuff is, are they getting the work that needs to be accomplished at the time that's required and at the quality that's required? That's, in other words, we're measuring accomplishment. We're not measuring activity. Like I can't tell you, Ted, how many times during the pandemic I had leaders say, like, I don't know, I don't even know if they're working. I said, you didn't know if they were working when they were in the office. And they would look at me. I'm like, well, they were at their desk. I said, unless you look over their shoulder, you don't know what they're doing. Like measuring productivity based on FaceTime is a fallacy. Productivity is work done per unit time, right? And so the thing I'd be looking at is how much time is it taking people to get things done? Not are they getting them done? We need to obviously make sure they're getting things accomplished. But too many people are trying to build metrics around are they physically there, and all of the technology that's tracking people with their mouse and their like that's just 21st century Taylorism, right? And what we need is to lean into trust. And if we lean into trust and we have clear expectations of what the work output, what the deliverables are, then we shouldn't have near as much trouble with all this as people like to think we do.
In your experience in working with leaders, and you've worked with countless leaders through your career, and given the fact that we have multiple generations in the organization, do you find many leaders have a strong ability to actually talk about the human component or the combining the IQ and the EQ together?
Well, certainly many do, right? And those that do are those that are most successful, right? So rather than to generalize and say, well, they do or they don't, I mean, there's no doubt that leaders that have worked at building both their EQ and IQ, or however you want to frame that, are going to be more effective, right? I said earlier that as we become a better human, we become a better leader, and vice versa, which simply means, well, it's not simple, but what it implies is that the human skills of leading are important because we're leading humans, right? Who are amazing and wonderful and inconsistent and messy. They're all of those things, right? And so we have to recognize that. We need to celebrate that. We need to be ready to grant people grace. We need to probably, in many cases, for some leaders, have more patience than we might naturally have. And when we do those things, we will likely get far better results.
So you mentioned, which I think is very good, you mentioned that as we become better leaders, we become better humans. That leads into culture. And that's really the basis of building a team. What's the culture of the team, and can we embed it with the right thing? How do you go about forming team dynamics and culture with organizations?
Well, so our definition of culture is the way we do things around here, right? So pretty simple and you always have one, right? Whether it's the one you want or not the one you want, right? People say we need to bring people back to the office so we can have our culture. Well, you had one and you still got one. And if you bring people back, by the way, it's not automatically going to be the culture you had before, right? So we need to be careful about that statement. Now, there may be things inside of that culture that you're trying to preserve that being back together might help with. I'm not questioning that, but that's too blanket of a statement to be helpful until we dive into it a little bit more. So the thing that I would say about culture is you've already got one. The question now is it the one that best serves the team, that best serves outcomes and others? And if it's not, aspirationally, where do we want to take that? And to me, that's something that should be jointly decided between the team and the leader. And then specifically in terms of implementation tomorrow, like if there's an aspirational culture you're trying to go towards as a leader, then number one, you need to be modeling that in your own behaviors. And number two, you need to be making decisions through the lens of that aspirational culture. If you do two things, you are constantly reinforcing what you're trying to create in terms of that. So for example, one of the best ways to look at the culture of an organization is to watch a meeting. And like you, Ted, I'm sure like you, I've walked into hundreds of meetings in client locations, and I've delivered training in client locations. And sometimes you'll hear, well, and I say, well, we're going to start at 9. And say, well, 9 here is like 10 after 9. Well, that's the culture, right? Whether you like it or whether you don't. So the only way you're going to change it is to starting at 9 o'clock. I mean, if that's what you want to do, you have to change it, and you have to start doing it the new way. You can't just lament the way it currently is, right? Super simple and kind of silly example, but true nonetheless.
So as you're talking, I can't help but thinking of the word collaboration. Teams, leaders, they all have to collaborate and come together. What do you find today in today's business environment, which is different than it was 10 years ago and beyond in the past? What's the challenge of getting people to collaborate from a conscious standpoint? Do people still use the carrot and stick method in your mind, or are there more elegant ways and refined ways now of guiding and communicating and leading people?
Well, I think if we truly want collaboration in our organization, then that needs to be a part of the expectation that we have of people in their work. It has to be part of the way in which we reinforce, reward, and perhaps incent them to make all that happen. Now, here's what's happened. When people went to work from home, the way that we see our work is defined in part by what is in our environment. Mm-hmm. And if we're working from, as my colleague Wayne Trammell likes to say, our extra bedroom or the north end of our dining room table, what is in our environment is not the same as if we walk into an office building that has our company's name on it and we see metrics on monitors in hallways or in lunchrooms. Like, it's just different. And so if we want the kinds of collaboration that we had before, we probably are going to come at them in different ways. And thank goodness for technology, because imagine if we'd have had the pandemic 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would have been an entirely different thing, mm-hmm. right? When what we had was a fax machine, right? And a phone. And so, we have tools that can enable collaboration. We may need to reframe what we mean by it. I will say that I believe, because my team is largely remote, that we absolutely can collaborate at distance. And yet, if my team, I have 2 members of my team that are in the office some of the time, and more likely for me to collaborate with them when they're here if I can, because why wouldn't we? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean we can't when we're not. And it doesn't mean we don't collaborate with the people that I don't ever see, or that I see once or twice a year. And so I think we have to be clear about what we expect around collaboration. I think we have to have a conversation about what that actually means now, which might be different than it used to be. And that's okay. And if that means we have to get better at using the technologies, then let's get better at using the technologies. If that means that we work differently on the days we're in the office than on the days we're not, which I think we should, then let's do that too.
Mm-hmm. So I want to change topic for a moment if I can. Sure. Your new book that's coming out, Flexible Leadership. Mm-hmm. We're living in a time of fierce change, disruption. It's constant. It's not like every 10 years we have some disruptive event. It's every year almost now. Since the pandemic, we're going through this. So the pace of change, largely due to maybe technology changes, AI's coming, we don't know what that looks like, but the pace of change seems to be outpacing the ability of an organization's skill set to keep up with that pace of change. So they're constantly falling behind. I'm sure flexibility is going, and we're going to talk about that in a minute more, but flexibility with change, you can't get change if you're not flexible. Tell us a little bit about your insights and what your thoughts are on that today.
Well, the first thing is that the mental health psychologist professionals tell us that we all have a point at which too much change will shut us down as humans, right? It's not the same for all of us. And so we have to, number one, recognize that there's a point at which more change is just going to shut us down. And that can happen in organizations. I do think sometimes people in organizations use that as an excuse. I personally believe that. But I also know that it is sort of a clinical fact, right? So we need to start there, which means that we have to help prioritize the things that are most important for us to adjust to, right? Like we don't have to we don't have to take on every last thing that's changing in the world. So as an organization, and I'm just sort of making this up off the top of my head, are we going to focus on AI? Are we going to focus on climate stuff? Are we going to focus on supply chain stuff? Are we going to focus on changing customer demographic stuff? Like, I don't know what your 5 things would be, but if you got 5 things, you got no things. right? So we have to sort of say, where are we going to start? Like if we want to implement anything, right? If we got too many things on the list, we're not going to get anywhere. So we have to be able to prioritize. And by the way, the word priority, the underlying word in the word priority originally didn't have a plural. There was one. And in fact, in the use of the word priority, it didn't start becoming pluralized until less than 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago, people didn't talk about priorities much. They talked about what is our priority. And I think moving back in that direction is helpful, because if we are trying to look at and address every single change that's impacting us at once, we are likely to be inundated and likely to get shut down. So we as leaders have to help our teams figure out where we're going to start, and then what's going to be next, and then what's going to be next, and not treat everything like fire. Like a fire, like we're firefighting, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people go into emotional overwhelm and they just freeze.
Exactly.
And that creates a new challenge for leadership. But
especially if it's us. Like we have to be aware that as a leader, right? This isn't just something that's impacting our folks. It's impacting us. And so we have to get clearer about all this. Better human, better leader, right? We have to get better at this ourselves so that we can lead our teams.
So how do they get better? And I'm saying that from the standpoint that you're running a business, you run a business, big organizations. It's hard for a leader, founder, leader, whatever, to not feel responsible for everything and everybody that's in the organization. And when they look out and see chaos, they go into overwhelm. How do you talk them back off the ledge?
I'll just speak for myself for a second. And I've been thinking about this particular question a lot lately. And I think that there's no doubt that, as people on my team say, well, Kevin, your name is on the door, right? You write the paycheck, and I do. That I do feel a sense of responsibility for my folks, for my team. And I think, generally speaking, that's a positive. That does not mean I have to be responsible for everything that happens here. Rather, if I am able to develop a team, trust a team, and let go of things, I can still have that overall sense of responsibility to make sure that we're strategically moving in a way that allows us to be successful, right? Without feeling responsible for all of the work, because that's going to get me into overload and not going to help the team be successful, feel meaning, or get things implemented.
So that comes back to self-awareness, self-control, both having the technical skills to do the job, but the emotional skills to be able to sit back and say, here's what we need to do. And we're all going to have outbursts, but at times we got to keep focused on that priority. So
I would agree with that. Yep.
Kevin, in your position, you're talking to a lot of different business people, and you see a lot of the common themes of what's happening, of importance and priorities of a business. I'm going to say that you have this insider advantage and that you can kind of see into the future a little further because you're talking to so many different businesses. I'm sure that's where the flexible leadership idea came about. Could you tell us a little bit about what's the kernel and the drive that started that whole idea that resulted in a book called Flexible Leadership?
Well, I can answer that question, but the first thing I want to say is anyone who thinks they can predict the future is going to be wrong. So I try to stay out of that as much as I can. Although I did say coming out of the pandemic that the future of work will be flexible, which isn't necessarily why this book is called Flexible Leadership, although it's a nice coincidence. The underlying big idea of this book is that for longer than I've been in this business, longer than I've been alive, really smart people have been trying to figure out how to create ways to define and describe leaders and leadership so that leaders could get better. And they've had great intention and they've built great models and all of that's wonderful. And there's been an unintended consequence in almost all of it. And that is that once we develop a model or a style or a set of approaches or strengths or weaknesses or all of those things, leaders, because as humans, we are pattern recognizers and pattern followers. Once I find out that I'm an X kind of leader, then I start to lead in that way, which is fine until it's not. In other words, understanding our leadership style is great to a point, right? But to say, well, that's not my strength, so then that's just not how I lead, is not going to get us the results we need, especially in a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever. And so we have to move past the idea of a model, of a style, of an approach, and we have to think about there are things that we don't flex, right? Principles. We don't flex values. We can't flex human behavior and dynamics, but what we need to be able to do is flex our approach based on context. So the idea is we must become more flexible to meet the needs the world is putting on us to lead successfully into the future.
So you used the key word there, and that is context. Context takes me back to what's the company vision? What's the core values and beliefs that are going to guide us there? How do we want to get there? But underlying all of that, we need mental and emotional flexibility, or we will never be able to adapt. And to me, that kind of like adaptability and flexibility, hand in hand. Your comments?
100%. And context isn't just those internal things. It's all those external things we were talking about. Like, what's the context of the business problem we're facing isn't just the internal stuff. It's also what's going on in the world. What's the context of what the customers are saying they want or need? What's the context of the global implications of this? What's the greater context? And how we as leaders make sense of that context, make sense of the world, becomes the critical new skill. Because once you figure that out or have a clue about that, that's when you know when and what and how to flex. That's what the book's about.
Okay. And do you get into anything about how do you break past patterns that you blind spots in your own self and behaviors?
We sure do. So I said these three words earlier. I'll say them again. And the book is framed around the ideas of what are the mindset of a flexible leader, what are the skill sets of a flexible leader, and what are the habit sets of a flexible leader. Okay. How do we get past? It's one thing, and we're talking about implementation, right? And so to me, a big gap in implementation is what many people call the knowing doing gap. Like, it's one thing to know something, it's another thing to go do it. And so it's creating the new habit. And then I like to think not just the habit, but the new routine. It could be the new process, perhaps. And until we get past the skill to the habit, we're not going to be successful in being more flexible as a leader. We're not going to be more flexible in implementing what we're trying to accomplish in our business, whatever it is.
So would I be correct in saying then the flexible leadership hypothesis is that if you want to implement and be successful and manage change, you have to be flexible, and you're laying out guidelines in order to do that?
100%.
Okay.
Yep. And people can go already pre-order the book. They can just go to, you can find it on Amazon, but you can just go to kevineikenberry.com/flexible, and it'll point you right there where you can go ahead and pre-order a copy. We'd love to have you do that.
Very good. Kevin, what do you see in your future? Where are you going and what's exciting you?
Well, I'm excited about this book. I mean, I've had the chance to write or co-write or contribute to a lot of books over my career. And I believe this is my best work, my most important work. So I'm excited about what we will be able to help leaders do with this idea of flexible leadership and the mindset, skill set, and habit sets that support that. And so my future is to continue to do the work we've been doing for a long time, which is to help more leaders make a bigger positive difference in the world. And that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what I think I was put on the planet to do. And I'm excited to keep on doing it. Very good, Kevin. I think you're fulfilling your purpose. You can tell that in talking to you. You're excited about it. You're coming out with great ideas, and you want to get them implemented. So the no-do gap is becoming smaller because of your efforts. Congratulations. I sure hope so. That's as kind a thing as anyone could say to me. Well, I think you've earned it.
What's the best way for someone to contact you should they have questions?
Well, people can certainly find me on LinkedIn. If you can spell my name, Kevin Eikenberry, Eikenberry. You can find me on LinkedIn, reach out there and say, hey, I appreciated this. I'd love to have you do that. And again, kevineikenberry.com, where you can find all of our products and services. You click on the book link, you can find the Long Distance Leader book. And we've already pointed you to where you can find flexible leadership. But fundamentally, kevineikenberry.com. Or find me on LinkedIn. If you're looking for another podcast besides your great podcast, Ted, I have a podcast called the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Love to have people listen there as well.
Very good. Kevin, I said in the beginning it was an honor to have you with us, and you earned that right. It was an honor. Enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Ted Wolf here. I want to thank you for joining us for this Implementors video. The Implementors podcast is presented by Guidewise, where we, along with our vetted member community, recognize that ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. To learn more about getting things done with Guidewise, please visit us at guidewise.io. And to conquer your implementation struggles, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Happy implementing.